It's because you finally understand that holding on to that old self means staying in a cage that you built, but have now outgrown. The collapse isn't destruction, it's transformation. The old self fades not because it was wrong, but because you've outlived it. The moment awareness dawns, the moment you decide to wake up, your past version begins to dissolve. It's the birth of consciousness, the realization that you are not your pain, your habits, or your story. You see, most people go through life repeating the same emotional cycles. They wake up every day reacting the same way, thinking the same thoughts, reliving the same pain disguised as routine. They identify so deeply with who they think they are that they forget they can be anything else. But when you truly watch something that shakes you awake, something that reaches deep into your core and makes you question everything, that's when the collapse starts. You start seeing through the illusion that you've been carrying for years, the illusion that your identity is fixed. Suddenly, all the justifications you used to protect your pain no longer make sense. The excuses you've made for staying small sound hollow. The comfort you used to find in your familiar misery starts to feel suffocating. The old self begins to crumble not out of punishment, but because it can't coexist with awareness. You can't unsee truth. Once you glimpse who you could be beyond your limitations, the walls of your old identity start to fall apart. The collapse is uncomfortable because the old self fights back. It doesn't want to die. It will try to make you believe you're losing yourself when in reality, you're finally meeting your real self for the first time. It whispers doubt, fear, and guilt. It reminds you of your past mistakes, trying to make you feel undeserving of change. But that's just the echo of an identity built on survival, not growth. The collapse happens in layers. First, your beliefs about yourself start to fall. The stories you told yourself to feel safe begin to sound false. The emotions that once ruled your choices start to feel foreign. You begin to notice that you no longer react the same way to things that used to trigger you. That's growth disguised as chaos. It feels like confusion at first because your old self is losing control. But underneath that confusion is freedom. The freedom to choose who you are instead of unconsciously living who you've been. The process is painful because it requires honesty. You start to see how often you betrayed yourself to please others. You start realizing how many of your dreams you postponed because of fear. You start remembering all the times you settled, not because you lacked potential, but because you lacked belief. That honesty stings, but it also heals. Each truth you face becomes a hammer breaking down the walls of the old you. And with every piece that falls, the real you emerges more clearly. The one who doesn't need validation, the one who doesn't beg for love, the one who doesn't apologize for existing. You start to feel lighter. You begin to understand that the collapse was never destruction. It was liberation. What's dying is not you, but the image you created to survive a version of life that no longer exists. As you awaken, you start realizing that everything you once thought was permanent was never real. Your fears were thoughts, your limitations were beliefs, your sadness was a story you replayed. The old self was a mask you wore to fit into a world that rewards conformity. But now you see beyond the surface. You start questioning your reactions, your attachments, your goals. You begin to ask, is this truly me or just a reflection of what I was taught to be? That question alone changes everything because awareness dissolves illusion. Once you become aware of the programming that shaped you, you can no longer live unconsciously. The old you collapses not because you destroy it, but because it has nowhere left to stand. It's like light entering a dark room. Darkness doesn't resist, it simply fades. This collapse leads to silence. There's a point in your transformation where everything feels still. You don't know who you are yet, and the old self is gone. That space can feel empty, but it's sacred. It's where rebirth happens. It's the silence between the death of your past and the birth of your future. You're not broken in that space. You're becoming. Most people fear that emptiness because it feels uncertain. But that uncertainty is your freedom. It's the blank canvas where you begin to paint your new self, not based on old wounds, but on awareness and choice. That's when the rebuilding begins, not with external validation, but with inner alignment. You start choosing peace over chaos, growth over comfort, authenticity over approval. You stop chasing things to fill your emptiness and instead realize you already are what you've been seeking. In that realization, you no longer need to prove anything. You no longer need to compete or compare. You start recognizing that your worth isn't dependent on your achievements or your past. The old self was constantly seeking something outside to feel whole. The new self knows wholeness is internal. You start forgiving people, not because they deserve it, but because holding on keeps you tied to the old version of yourself. You stop arguing to be right because peace feels better than pride. You start choosing silence over reaction, boundaries over guilt, and purpose over distraction. These small, invisible shifts are signs that the collapse has completed its purpose. You've transcended survival and entered creation. You no longer live by default. You live by design. The moment this awareness enters, it changes your relationship with everything, time, people, and even pain. You start realizing that pain isn't punishment. It's a signal. Every discomfort you feel is your soul pushing you toward expansion. The old self avoided pain by hiding behind distractions and excuses. The new self faces it, learns from it, and transforms through it. You stop running away from what hurts because you understand that every emotional storm passes once you stop fighting it. You begin to see beauty in struggle because you realize it's shaping you. The collapse was never about losing. It was about shedding layers that no longer align with who you're becoming. As your old self falls away, you start remembering things your soul always knew. You remember that you were born limitless. You remember that you are energy, constantly evolving. You remember that you have the power to recreate yourself at any moment. And that realization changes how you see everything. You stop defining yourself by your past because you now see it as training, not identity. You stop judging others because you see them as mirrors reflecting your own lessons. You stop fearing the future because you realize you're creating it moment by moment through awareness. The old self lived in fear, believing life happened to it. The new self lives in power, knowing life responds to it. With every breath, your consciousness expands. You begin to sense how deeply connected everything is. You notice the synchronicities, the small signs guiding you, the energy behind every thought. The old self used to overlook these things, calling them coincidences. The new you sees them as alignment. You start trusting the process, understanding that every ending was preparation for this awakening. Every heartbreak was an initiation. Every loss was a lesson. The collapse was the universe's way of clearing what could no longer grow with you. You start feeling grateful for what once broke you, because it built the strength to rise. Gratitude becomes your natural state, not because life is perfect, but because you finally are present. And as you embody this new awareness, people around you start to notice. Some will be drawn to your energy, others will drift away. That's natural. The vibration of your new self can't match the frequency of your old connections. You no longer chase what leaves or cling to what no longer fits. You understand that everything in your life is a reflection of your internal state. If you stay in growth, everything around you aligns with growth. You no longer fear losing people or opportunities because you trust that what's meant for your new self will find you effortlessly. That's the quiet confidence that comes after the collapse, an unshakable peace that no external circumstance can disturb. The collapse of your old self is not a moment. It's a process that continues every time you choose awareness over autopilot. Every time you face a trigger and respond consciously, the old self weakens. Every time you choose love over fear, the old identity fades further. Every time you listen to your intuition instead of your insecurity, the new self strengthens. This is the real awakening, not a mystical experience, but a daily decision to align with truth. And the more you do it, the more natural it becomes. Soon, the idea of going back to your old patterns feels impossible because you've tasted freedom. You can't unknow what you now know. You can't unsee the truth that you are not your story. You are the author. So when you hear the words or the moment you watch this, your old self begins to collapse. Know that it's not just poetic. It's reality. Awareness is the most powerful energy in existence. The act of observing yourself destroys illusion. You are no longer trapped in the narrative of who you thought you were. You've stepped into consciousness, into creation, into infinite possibility. The collapse is your awakening, and the emptiness that follows is your rebirth. You are no longer living from memory. You're living from awareness. And that awareness is the beginning of true freedom, peace, and power. The old self doesn't die in pain. It fades in peace, finally releasing you to become everything you were meant to be.